गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीधसाधनम् ॐ श्रीमहागणपतये नमः। ॐ हंसाय विद्महे परमहंसाय धीमहि तन्नो हंस प्रचोदयात्। ॐ श्री सरस्वत्यै नमः। ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुं सस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः। ॐ शान्ति 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 हरि ओम। जहाजी पितरी की, जहाजी पितरी की, जहाजी पितरी की। Ravi ji, Director of the Ancestral Agenda, Geeta Vahini ji, President of the Hindu Prachaar Kendra, Dr. and Mrs. Bhoendratt Tewarie, Professor and Mrs. Narayan Singh, and all specially invited guests, and my fellow children of the Pitris. Namaskar. In my role as chairperson of the Ancestral Agenda, which is the Hindu Prachaar Kendra's Pitri Paksh event for the year 2022, I welcome all of you present here today. Today is the second of 6 premier events that the Hindu Prachaar Kendra is holding as part of our pioneer project during this auspicious time of Pitri Paksh. Ravi has always declared that Pitri Paksh is the most important time, the most auspicious time for us as Hindus in Trinidad and throughout the world. And through this innovative project, we are now getting to explore why that is so, by placing our focus on creating a special space to honor our ancestors. This Sunday that just went, we held our inauguration program of the Ancestral Agenda, and I hope all of you got a chance to view it. It's there on YouTube. If you did not, please, I encourage you to take some time and view that program, because Ravi had expounded so beautifully on why we must create this space and why it is the duty of every Hindu to spend time not only learning about our ancestors and honoring them, but remembering the contributions that they made. Tonight's presentation, our second program, will follow that very lead. Through discussion and interpretation of the Sri Ram Charitmanas, Dr. Bhoendratt Tewarie will be expounding on themes surrounding Pitri Paksh. Now, we all know Trinidad has always been known as Ramayan country. The Jahajis couldn't bring much with them. We didn't have many suitcases to walk with. And the journey across the Kalapani was treacherous. It was very difficult. But they held on to certain things. And the Sri Ram Charitmanas was one of them. And that alone speaks volume of the value of this sacred text. To be able to build this space that we know as home, to create a life in a foreign country, to build a legacy, and that we are reaping the benefits of today, the Pitris or Jahajis relied heavily on the words of Baba Tulsidas to help them through. And that is why we look to the words of the Manas as part of the Ancestral Agenda, because it guided our Pitris. And now, as we remember them, it must also guide us. For every event of the Ancestral Agenda, we are honoring our Pitris and recognizing some particular Pitris who have made indelible contributions on society. Tonight, since we are looking at the Sri Ram Charitmanas, we will be recognizing and offering Shraddhanjali for none other than Baba Tulsidas himself, because he is our Kula Guru. He is the Guru of our community. And therefore, he is our Kula Pitri. And his text, the Sri Ram Charitmanas, is our Kula Shastra. And if you don't know the meaning of the word Shastra, I invite you to look at the speech that Raviji gave on Sunday. And without this contribution by Baba Tulsidas, the community that we know as Hindu Trinidad could not exist. Baba Tulsidas was a writer, and following in his footsteps, our own Guruji Raviji has been writing for many years, compositions that have quite literally changed the landscape of Trinidad. And through his writing, he has made a space for others to come and write and express through a forum we know as Pichikari. One such composition is Jai Tulsidas, that was composed in the year 1997 by a Pichikari contestant, Sri Jagdev Paguji, on the 500th birth anniversary of Baba Tulsidas. It praises Baba Tulsidas and his contribution to our civilization. So I will invite the Mandali to present this Pichikari, and while it is being presented, I will invite our featured speaker, Dr. Bhoendratt Tewarie, accompanied by Raviji and Geetaji, to light the diya at the feet of Baba Tulsidas as we offer Shraddhanjali, and then to come and take their seats on the stage. So I now present to you Jai Tulsidas by Jagdev Paguji.
रामायण समग्रंथ नहीं, खोजो सब इतिहास, भवसागर तारन नाव यही, राखो अपने पास। रामचरित मानस बिमला, रचिए तुलसीदास, रचिए तुलसीदास, कष्ट हरन कलिजुग को यही हमारे आस। जय तुलसीदास जी, जय तुलसीदास, रामायण है अमर, जय तुलसीदास आया यहाँ मेरे पुरखों के पास। Caribbean Hinduism was born from Tulsidas. Tulsidas, 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 Tulsidas. The pains of revolution felt in the motherland when masses sought to worship in their education, restricted in their knowledge, survival was the key. So languages and cultures flourished in peasantry. When religious explosion impacted on the world, then Tulsidas' vision started to unfold. Jai Tulsidas ji, Jai Tulsidas, Ramayan hai amar, Jai Tulsidas आया यहाँ मेरे पुरखों के पास। Caribbean Hinduism was born from Tulsidas. Tulsidas, 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 Tulsidas. When religions competed for the illiterate, love for humanity. No scholars, kings or pundits could stop spirituality. His story tells how Rama, Sita and Hanuman conquered wicked Ravan with might and devotion. Jai Tulsidas ji, Jai Tulsidas. Ramayan hai amar, Jai Tulsidas. Aaya yahan mere purkhon ke paas. Caribbean Hinduism was born from Tulsidas. Tulsidas, 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 Tulsidas. In these times of Kaljug, when temptation steps in, that wisdom and philosophy helps fight it from within. His music, songs and poetry send soothing vibrations, could destroy any evil when used with devotion. Our dharma, arth and kama, he explains in Ramayan. The way of life to moksha, our destination. Ram, 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 Ram. The darkness of indentureship, pressures of the past was fought with aspiration. We drew from Tulsidas. That guiding light showed clearly the path to destiny, reflecting elevations we made in this country, a land of different cultures, races and religion. Our Jhandi flutters proudly, marking Hinduism. Jai Tulsidas, Jai Tulsidas, Jai Tulsidas, Jai Tulsidas.
Goswami Tulsidas
महाराज की जय,
Trinidad और Tobago
देश की जय,
सियापति रामचंद्र
चंद्र की जय,
जय श्री राम
जय श्री राम.
So now we have heard about Baba Tulsidas, and we have made this space now ready for our Kula Guru and the Kula Shastra that he has given to us. So now it's my great pleasure to present to you our feature presenter for tonight, Dr. Bhoendratt Tewarie. Dr. Tewarie is a retired University of the West Indies principal and pro-vice chancellor who served at the St. Augustine campus. He has served for 15 years in Parliament in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and has been a cabinet minister in 2 administrations. Dr. Tewarie is a Fulbright scholar who has written 5 books, 3 with collaborators, and currently writes a weekly column in the Trinidad Guardian. He is married to Srimati Kamla Tewarie and is the father of Nirad and Shanta Tewarie. On becoming the first Hindu principal of the University of the West Indies, he was honored with the Kanti Marg Award by the Hindu Prachaar Kendra in the year 2001. Dr. Tewarie is a V.S. Naipaul scholar and has written about his work and made 2 films about Naipaul. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Tewarie, and I welcome him to the podium to extol on the works of Baba Tulsidas.
Thank you very, very much, Vishala. Namaskar, everybody. Sitaram. I must admit that I'm a little nervous, and I don't know why, but I'm a little nervous. And it'll probably go in a couple of minutes, but I probably am nervous because, in a way, this is a signal and significant undertaking to try to locate the significance and the role of ancestors in our religious, spiritual, family, community, civilizational tradition. And this initiative by the Hindu Prachaar Kendra is a very important one, and I want to acknowledge that. Raviji, Gita, Vahini, Dr. and Mrs. Narayan Singh, and all of you very, very important and significant members of the community here. I want to thank you and the Kendra and the committee that must have agreed on this for, first of all, putting together the occasion. And this began with an overview of Pitri Paksh last Sunday by Raviji, and also for making Pitri Paksh the period of time that we are now in as a time of thoughtfulness and reflection. I want to thank the organizers at the Kendra, and especially Raviji and Gita ji, for inviting me to give my perspective. And I think one of the reasons I'm nervous is because I was here on Sunday and I listened to Raviji, and I mean, to follow him is not, I don't think that's an easy task for anyone. I want you to bear in mind, as I give my point of view, that I am not a theologian. I would not also consider myself learned in the scripture, nor would I ever claim to be knowledgeable on Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. I know a little bit about it, but I would make no big claim. I was born a Hindu. I live it to the extent that I can. I identify with my brothers and sisters within the Hindu community, both their achievements and their trials and tribulations. But I tend to have a more humanistic outlook and a broad perspective on life. Now, I say that not in contradiction to Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma, because I consider that to be I consider the tradition to be at least in part, I consider my perspective to be at least derived from the Hindu perspective that I grew up with, which was one of tolerance, which was one of questioning, which was one that was respectful of beliefs, and which also had an all-embracing sense of humanity and of approaches to the divine. In my own exposure to Western education too, I was more drawn to deep and broad philosophical perspectives than I ever was to narrow or sectarian or ideology-bound thinking. With this as basic background, therefore, I ask you to consider what I have to say with openness, with your own questions that might pop up in your mind, and I ask that you connect the dots that might arise based on your own knowledge and experience, and consider that my perspective is simply one point of view. So, namaskar again, and I will read from the text that I have prepared. I've titled my talk, Some Thoughts on Remembering Our Ancestors. When one thinks of the future of human civilization, we probably think of it in terms of 4 perspectives or trajectories. First of all, there's the status quo trajectory, and this is one in which human life more or less continues or persists, not too much different from the way human civilization is now. In other words, we think that time will pass and human beings will go on very much as they have gone on for eons and centuries. Then there are more what you might call catastrophic trajectories, in which some disaster befalls the human race and human civilization as we know it is disrupted. Now that could be a pandemic. We've had some experience of that. It has been disruptive, perhaps not as disruptive as it could be. It could be a world war, it could be an unforeseen natural disaster. Thirdly, we might have what you might call technological transformation trajectories, where scientific technologies and their breakthroughs might put human civilization on a different course. And I think we are already seeing where artificial intelligence and space travel, for instance, advancing significantly, might put the human race in a situation that we had never anticipated before. And then there are what are called the astronomical trajectories. This is one in which human civilization expands beyond Earth to other accessible portions or planets of the cosmos. Now, ironically, such a thing is mentioned in the Ramayan. Scientists calculate that Earth could continue to host life for another 1.75 billion years. This could change if there's a nuclear holocaust, if an errant asteroid drops on us, or if there is some kind of unanticipated or unprecedented disaster. Climate change or other forces of nature could also make the Earth uninhabitable in a shorter time. So these are some of the scenarios for the human race and human civilization when you take a Western scientific view. An individual, on the other hand, people like me and you or anybody else, no matter how great, how small, we have, at the very most, 100 years, maybe you might live 120, you might live 80, you might live 70, 60. You might die young. But at most, we have on average about 100 years or so. And the 2 big questions for an individual human being seem to be these 2 questions. How should I live? And secondly, what happens to me when I die? Now, both are very hard existential as well as spiritual questions, on which philosophy and theology give some guidance. Science alone is not able to answer. And both questions are connected in Hindu theology because of something called the law of karma. Because according to that law, how you live today determines your future existence. Hinduism has a cycle also of ages that encompasses the evolution of human civilization. Within this framework, there are 4 ages. Each one is 4,320,000 years or 12,000 divine years long. Satyug, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Human civilization has gone through 3 ages and we are now living in the 4th, Kali Yuga. 3 ages mean 13 million plus years have gone. Kali Yuga started around 3102 BCE, we are told. So by 2302, about 80 years from now, humans in this age should have lived 5,000 years of Kali Yuga with 4,315,000 years still to go. Kali Yuga ends, we are told, when human degeneracy, morally and physically, will be at its worst. That opens the door for a new age. And that new age after Kali Yuga is an age of dharma, of righteous action, to be established in Satyug. This is how the Mahabharata describes Satyug. Men neither bought nor sold. There were no poor, no rich. There was no need for labor because all that men required was obtained by power of will. The chief virtue was the abandonment of all worldly desires. The Kirta Yuga, which is another name for Satyug, is also known, was without disease. There was no lessening with the years. There was no hatred or vanity or evil thought whatsoever. No sorrow, no fear. All mankind could attain to supreme blessedness. It is a golden age. Kali Yuga, however, is our age. This is one in which people are unsatisfied and mentally depressed, and which becomes more and more morally degenerate. So we are living in the morally degenerating age and won't see any of us who are now alive the age of grace and the age of spiritual loftiness in our time. Other later generations will inherit that new age, but before that, there is the expectation that things will eventually get worse. But that does not exempt us from answering the question, how to live? How does a good person live? Nor does it stop us from wondering about what happens when we die. I know that I'm supposed to speak about the Ramayan, but I want to speak about the Bhagavad Gita first and make some connections as I come to the Ramayan. The Bhagavad Gita tells us about the battle of Kurukshetra, which is a metaphor for the battle going on within each one of us between the tendencies towards righteous actions and the temptations to deviate from that noble path of duty. That battle rages constantly within us, but we must choose. Lord Krishna tells Arjuna his duty, and Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, to do his duty and to choose righteous action, because the purpose of life is to free the soul and so give it eternal life by doing that. Therefore, there is no need to worry about or fear death. The soul is God within us while we live, and when the body dies, the soul returns to its origin, which is God, the source of all life. But how do we live when we live within the framework of a body in the human world? This is where the Ramayan comes in. We must aim for ideal conduct. And it is in the Ramayan that gives us a guide of how to live. As son, as father, as husband, wife, brother, leader, citizen, human being in the society. However long we live in our mortal body, our journey of life is divided within our tradition into 4 stages. Student when we pursue education, householder when we focus on family, social and public responsibility when we build society and give public service, and then finally retreat and detachment from things of the material world and the pursuit of spiritual oneness with the divine. It is within that framework that human conduct is examined in a manner to decide what to do, what not to do, and why and how to do it. In the Holy Ramayan, which came to us in Trinidad and Tobago, as Vishala told you, with our ancestors, as the Ramayan of St. Tulsidas, that is the focus, ideal human conduct. So it is the Ramayan that we will examine today to look at how one must live and behave to prepare the soul and to connect the dead to the living to the unborn, so that we have some continuity and connectivity as human being in a family, in a community, in a society, in a civilization. The first time I read this phrase, the dead to the living to the unborn, was from Joseph Conrad, because I'm a literature student. And I found that it resonated with things that I had learned from my grandfather in the discussion. Because my grandfather would read from the Vedas, he would read from the Ramayan, he would read from other things, and he would talk to us about it. And I felt that Joseph Conrad, who was a person of Polish descent and who wrote some of the best English prose that was ever written as an English novelist, I thought that he must have had some kind of connection with the literature and the spiritual text that came out of our tradition. While we live as humans, we live in and for society. While we facilitate spiritual evolution and achievement. Indeed, the reign of Lord Rama and Mother Sita in Ayodhya after their 14 years of banishment is described in the Ramayan as follows. I quote now, "The long and prosperous reign of Rama and Sita was a golden age, the like of which is unknown in the annals of man." And why was Ram Raj glorious in this way? Because Lord Rama was, I quote again, thankful, just, pious, generous, and brave. And Mother Sita was pure, faithful, tender, and resolute. As leaders of dharmic conduct and decision-making according to Dharma, they built the ethos of their kingdom and society on dharmic principles. In the Ramayan it is written that Dharma is rooted in him, that is to say Lord Rama, and he, Lord Rama, is rooted in Dharma. This is how Lord Rama is described. Rama and Sita represent ideal conduct to which men and women should aspire so that society can be moral, just, bountiful, and happy. And when leaders exhibit ideal conduct and are exemplars, the rest of the society learns and emulates. Ravan is the adharmic, opposite of Ram, and that is what their battle is about, so that good can triumph over evil, so that dharma shall prevail. That is the moral path of the Ramayan. Ram is the example of desirable conduct. Ravan is the example of how not to live, what not to do. In the tradition, and with these examples and lessons from the Ramayan, how should a good person live? Well, he should pursue the path of dharma along the 4 stages of life, so that dharma and dharmic action can prevail from generation to generation. Within that tradition, the continuity of tradition is facilitated by sanskars, of which there are 16, and the one that connects us, the living, to the dead, and the soul of the dead, is the funeral or last rites to facilitate the easy passage of the soul to God, which is the super soul from which all souls originate. By facilitating that soul's passage, because of reincarnation or rebirth, because that is one aspect of it, we connect not just the living and the dead, or man to God, but the dead and the living to the unborn, to the cycle of life that takes us through different stages in our lifetime, but also, if you believe in reincarnation, and it is an important tenet of our belief, many lifetimes. The opportunity to be reborn or to be absorbed into the infinite, and therefore to cease the process of birth and rebirth by the manner in which you live and act. That is what determines it. That is the connection between how you live, the karma you make, and death. And the connection between the soul and God, the origin. It is the Bhagavad Gita that gives us that assurance. Everything that is born shall die, Lord Krishna says. But the soul does not die. It is everlasting because it is the spark of God, the divine spark within us. God is in us, and we must look for him within. And just as God is everlasting, just as the divine presence in the universe is everlasting, so is our divine soul everlasting. For a time, it might be in the body. And Lord Krishna tells us in the Gita, there never was a time when I did not exist, nor shall there ever be a time when I shall cease to be. God has been there from the beginning of time, and he shall always be there. It is Krishna's way, Lord Krishna's way of saying to Arjuna and to us that we must have faith, and that death is not to be feared, because it means nothing to the soul, which will either be reborn or be absorbed in the great divine soul of God once released. Within the Hindu tradition, there is the notion of ancestral spirits connected with a race of descendants, which really means family. For instance, after Ravan is killed and Sita comes through the test of fire, the Ramayan says the gods came down and showered their blessings on them, and so did the ancestral spirits of the Ishvaku race, referring to the ancestors of Lord Rama, Lakshman, Raja Dasrath, etc. Funeral rites are important in the Ramayan. When Raja Dasrath dies, quote, the Brahmins chanted the funeral hymns or sacred mantras, and Bharat lighted the pyre with appropriate ceremonies. Then all the people bathed in the river and performed tarpan for the spiritual benefit of the departed soul. Even in war, respect is paid to the rites that have to be performed for those who die, because the continuity of tradition, the final rites for the welfare of the soul, the reverence for ancestors, all these things are essential as the soul leaves the human body and passes to another realm of existence. When Ravan dies, Bibhisham begged of Lord Rama, who had conquered Ravan, permission for the funeral rites to be performed according to custom. And Lord Rama gave permission, replying, "All enmity ends with death. Do go ahead and perform his final rites." Bibhisham is, of course, the brother of Ravan, who has warned Ravan against his adharmic course of action and outlined the wrongness of Ravan's intentions to no avail. Let us shift for a moment from what we have read to what we experience as a Hindu in Trinidad and Tobago. Let us for a minute look at funeral rites for the departed within the Hindu tradition in Trinidad and Tobago as we practice it. Funeral rites are ideally performed by sons or grandsons, or a mixture in cases where, in cases where this cannot be done, brothers or nephews fill in. The purpose of this is for those who take part in this ceremony to also take part in the shaving and the Bhoendratt. These things are done in gratitude for the life lived in the family and with family, and the contribution to the welfare of children, grandchildren, and the welfare of the entire family. And because of a commitment to carry the memory of the departed and to keep the spirit alive as part of the continuity of family life and connections. The departed is remembered through the process, talked about, referred to, and the soul is prayed for. After Bhoendratt, the family, having had satsang for a number of days, comfort from the Pandit, support from the family, friends, neighbors, community, and having done all that is required to give support to the soul's journey, the family is now freed to continue on its own journey of life and the business of living. But during the period of Pitri Paksh, they must set aside a day to remember the person and to offer prayers on his or her behalf, and to pay reverence to their life, their contribution, their seniority, and to give gratitude for the time spent with us, their contribution to our welfare. And this will continue over generations, so there is a generational recognition of family ancestry, continuity, and the civilizational responsibility which connects all human beings through this tradition and also connects God to the ancestors to us, the unborn to us, who will eventually become their ancestors. We will become the ancestors of the unborn, and to the human race, which is connected to God because we are souls with a body, not a body with a soul. And soul is the spark of God which gives us life and opportunity for living, and which survives after death of the body. Because the law of karma determines the rise of the soul and the extent of pursuit of dharma and dharmic action or otherwise determines good and bad karma, then it is our responsibility as human beings to pursue righteous action and the path to goodness, and it is the responsibility of civilization and leadership in society to create conditions for goodness to prevail and righteous action to thrive and for good to triumph over evil. That is why Ram Raj as an ideal is so important as a concept. That is the cycle to help us to answer the questions. How should a good person live? And what happens after we die? And the connection between the two in the context of spiritual interpretation and in the context of a family continuity need and civilizational connectivity requirement. I hope that I've made the connections clear enough. I know it can be difficult to connect them and make sense of them. I hope that I've made the connection clear enough for you to appreciate and understand what I am trying to say. The inevitability of being born is death, but soul never dies. Only the body dies. Soul is the divine spark of God which resides within each of us and connects us to one another and to all living things and to God. What happens to the soul after it leaves the body depends on how we live. Because we make our own karma by the way we live and by the righteous actions that we take or otherwise, a life in pursuit of goodness is how we should live. The righteous path is known as the pursuit of dharma, which is the pursuit of truth, which are capital T, in the way in which we live. And the Bhagavad Gita tells us through Lord Krishna that in pursuing truth through righteous action, one chooses the path of selfless service, action without expectation, duty as self-responsibility. The body dies, so whatever karma a human being has built up is already done by the time the soul leaves the body. So the intervention of the family with the pandit at the funeral rites, the satsangs for the 12 days or 13 days as the case might be, the shaving and the bandara are really to ask for, first of all, forgiveness of God for the sins and wrongs committed by the individual and for God's grace, and to ask God's mercy and grace in accepting his or her soul or giving the soul an option for rebirth within a dharmic family where the soul can pursue a dharmic life. The Pitri Paksh worship is for the deceased to remember, is for the deceased in order to remember that ancestral soul as worthy, to pray for that soul and ancestor and to remember him or her and cherish his or her memory and contribution, and to prepare the ground for continuity of the tradition in the next generation here on earth among the living. In this way, continuity of family, tradition, community, and civilization is preserved. In this way, what happens after death and how to live as a human being are connected. In this way, God, man, family, community, civilization, and Sanatan Dharma are connected. In this way, the Gita, which tells us not to fear death, but to do our duty, and that the soul never dies, in this way it is connected to the Ramayan, which teaches us the example of ideal conduct and the path of truth through action in Dharma. In this way, Lord Krishna connects with Lord Rama in their teachings. And in the context of the theology of Sanatan Dharma, so the Bhagavad Gita teaches us how to die without fear and what to expect after death. And the Ramayan teaches us how to live to achieve our best karma. And our family, for whom one tries to do one's best while one is alive, prays for the well-being of that soul that is now gone, invoking memory, celebrating the life and the deeds, expressing gratitude for whatever the departed might have done of value in their lifetime, so that the memory of that ancestor lives as his or her soul travels to find its true destination, ultimate destination. Scholars generally agree that Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, is the world's oldest religion with roots and customs dating back more than 4,000 years. Readings in anthropological history suggest that the concept of God connected to communal worship began in the middle prehistoric era, which could have made it as long ago as 200,000 years or as late as 45,000 years ago, or somewhere in between. Now I say this, which is a Western perspective, but I also remind you that I told you that 13 million years ago, the world would have begun the process of encompassing 3 ages in the Hindu long calendar: Satyug, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and that we are now into 4,000 years plus so far of Kali Yuga. So you can try to reconcile that concept of human history and civilization and time in the Western evidential approach and the concept of ages as espoused in the Vedic theology, which would be a very, very complex and I would suggest very interesting task. Why do Hindus and others, that's to say non-Hindus, because it occurs among non-Hindus as well, venerate the departed soul? And as I said, there are other groups of people who do this. Well, I think first of all, because of love and respect for the deceased when they were alive, but also a desire to give him or her a good send-off and to help that ancestor to live in memory and through reputation. Secondly, the reverence is also in recognition of the continued existence of the soul. The body dies, but the soul doesn't. The soul is the indestructible entity that you want to support with prayer and offerings. And 3, there is also the sense that somehow our ancestors can influence the fortunes of the living. Now that I have not seen strongly in the Ramayan, and I don't know whether it is a factor that is deep in Hinduism, but it is a factor in some veneration of departed souls in other culture. This is especially true in Confucianism in China, which practices ancestor worship, and where it is said 70% of the adults adhere to the practice, and in which ancestor worship is central to Confucianism as a religion. Reverence for ancestors and worship of ancestors is also practiced in many tribes and countries of Africa, in Korea, in Japan, and of course in India among Hindus. It may interest you to know that early European culture also pursued this practice, and that in places like Finland and Hungary and some Slavic countries, vestiges of ancestral remembrance and reverence remain. It is a human phenomenon, clearly, that fulfills a human need and carries a spiritual connotation. So when you do Pitri Paksh Puja, you are connecting not just with your ancestors, but also with other cultures for whom the ancestral connection is vital and important. I hope that what I have shared with you helps you to understand Pitri Paksh a little bit. its practice and observance perhaps a little better. I hope that it helps you to locate it within the Hindu tradition and within the context of two vital texts in Hindu theology, the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayan, and the teachings of Lord Krishna and Lord Rama. I trust as well that you are able to appreciate it within the context of family, community, society, the afterlife of the soul. And at the same time, you appreciate the value of honoring a life, praying for the welfare of the soul, and treating with reverence the life, memory, and reputation of a departed loved one or family member. I hope that I've been able to help you to see that Hindus are not alone in their reverence of ancestors and their regard and respect for them. Other cultures have their way of addressing this. Other religions have their forms. As a Hindu, or anyone else for that matter, you have to make peace with what your sense of gratitude demands of you. And I once gave a talk talking about the concept of gratitude within our tradition, quoting from some of the Vedic texts. You also have to come to terms with what love requires of you and what comfort, reverence, remembrance, and a sense of continuity gives to you when someone that you love and care for dies and leaves your life as that soul passes on to another realm of existence. I've taken you from one thing to another to focus on the business of human existence and the way we live as human beings within our tradition, but also to distinguish between the journey of living as a human being on this earth and the journey of the soul to another place and with a divine connection, and try to explain the connection between the two and therefore its significance for us in Pitri Paksh. I hope that I have been clear enough to help you to at least think about some of the things that I've said, and you can come to your own conclusions about their value. Sitaram, Namaskar, Om Shanti.
HPK Pitri ki. So we thank Dr. Bhoendratt Tewarie for that wonderful, in-depth look into how we must live to prepare for when we die, and how we must honor those who have already crossed that threshold. Now, the next part of our program is going to be a very short, informal question and answer session. In case any of you all have anything you would like to comment on or ask Dr. Tewarie. I know while I was listening, some questions did come up, but Dr. Tewarie did such a good job. He answered them right after. But maybe there are some of you who still have questions open. So if by show of hand we could have some questions for Dr. Tewarie.
If it makes you feel any better, I have questions still.
I think I'll ask the first question. So you started off by posing a question to us, which is how you live, or how do you live? I think that's a very troubling question to ask a young adult, because, I mean, who really knows what to do? But what I want to ask is, in the context of Pitri Paksh, and Refugee stresses on remembering. So in remembering our Pitris, how do we use that to guide us to answer how to live, or how do we live?
Well, I can only give you, I can't give you a scriptural answer. I can only give you an understanding of the problem that you pose, right? Which is that someone close to you, an ancestor, a father, grandfather, whoever dies, becomes part of the becomes part of the departed and is gone. But while you are there, remember, until the funeral, you have about 12 days of family togetherness, satsang, the pundit comes. Within our tradition, we might have readings from the Ramayan or the Gita and so on. And you get a chance to reflect, I think, at that point, on the life of the person and on what the scriptures might be saying to you when the pundit or whoever is reading speaks. I think you then have a duty or a responsibility to try to understand and to do the research if necessary. And by that I don't mean going to the library and so on, taking the time to reflect on and try to understand, well, what was the gap in that person's life? What were the good things that that person did and that you can remember and you know for sure that these things were important and good things? What were the things in which you would assess that there were shortcomings? All right? And you would try to understand that with forgiveness and with charity, because we are not perfect beings. The Ramayan talks about ideal conduct. It talks about aspiring to that, right? But, I mean, the nature of life itself means that you are going to make mistakes, you are going to make errors, you're going to fall short. It's that nature. So I think every time we lose someone, we get a chance to reflect on these things. And I think that helps to kind of sharpen your focus on what you yourself can do in order to make yourself, if you want to, from a very simplistic way, a better person or live a better life or whatever. And as I said, you might aim for perfection or you might aim to be a little better, and we will always fall short. But I went to a school, Queen's Royal College. My friend Vijay also went to the same school, and there was a motto there which said, all strive, but the prize is not to all. And the purpose of that is not to tell you can't get the prize. The purpose of that is to tell you that the real purpose is in the striving, right? And I would say that that is the lesson you have to take.
Okay, so we have one more question. Also, anyone who is watching online, feel free to ask on the YouTube feed. I can pose the question for you. So yes, we have a question from Lakpadji.
Namaskar, Dr. Tewarie. In your discourse, you mentioned that there are two fundamental questions. One is, how should I live? And the other is, what happens to me when I die? You have done a very good job in explaining to us what we should do or how to live. And you also mentioned that Lord Krishna says we should not fear death. But being humans, it's a natural response to being alive that we fear death. So I am not, while you were clear on telling us how to live, I'm not too sure of what happens to me when I die.
Well, I don't know enough to tell you. I really don't. What I would say to you is this, which is that we have to wrestle all the time to try to live better, to be a better person. And you have to resist a lot of temptations along the way, and you have to fight yourself in many ways. You have to fight many forces. But you also, I know that in my own life, I'm making a confession here now, In my own life, I think that I used to be very fearful of death, right? But I think what has happened to me, I would say within very recent times, 2 or 3 years maybe, I think I understand that it was not fear of death. It was really the fear of the loss of life and living. That is what it was. I could not conceive of something that would give me more joy and a sense of value than living in the world of human beings with family, friends, community, and doing the things that are important in the world while you live. And I've now come to terms with that, which is that the fear is really about losing that opportunity that you consider valuable in the human world and not knowing what is going to happen thereafter. And even when you explain it and you say, we often say, as I've said to other people, make Lord Krishna embrace you, embrace your soul, and you have the oneness of God. That is to me, a very abstract concept. I'm confessing, I'm not a theologian, and I'm a Hindu, yes, but the issue of belief is a very complex thing, and I'm not pretending to have a sense of belief that does not question anything. So, when you think of being absorbed with God, well, why do you want to be absorbed by God? You know, what does that mean for you? And the second thing, when you say that you will not be born again, how is that so valuable when the life you live has been so cherished? So what you have known is that living among the human race, living in society, in community, in family has been good. So when you say you are going to stop that process of the cycle of birth and rebirth, and you have this abstract concept of being absorbed by the divine essence, and you don't know really what that experience means, you are not sure, you are not certain if that is what you want. And when you think of the process of the life cycle in which you live many lives and you may be reborn again, then there's the uncertainty whether you are going to be reborn, if you are reborn, in a better place or in a worse place. You begin to reflect on your own life and so on. And I think those things are troubling. They are very troubling things, but I think that is why we are human, and God gave us a brain and gave us a mind and gave us a rational capacity to argue, but he also argue with ourselves and argue about things, but he also gave us the ability to peacefully come to terms with self, to connect with something beyond rationality and have a sense of connectivity and purpose with something higher, with something nobler, something better. And I think when we sense those things in ourselves as human, we begin to believe that really there can be other things that are extraordinary. Who is to tell us that when you leave this life and your soul journeys somewhere, that is not on another plane, that is a realm of existence and experience that far, far surpasses what we have known as a human being.
Thank you, Dr. Tewarie, for that response. I think we probably have time for maybe one more question, if we don't have any. Okay. Okay, so last.
I actually do have one more question.
Okay.
So, Dr. Tewarie, being who you are and being in Parliament and things like that, has there ever been any policy or framework developed in the past, or I don't know if you know presently, that pushes the ancestral agenda and allows for this to be on a national level? And then if not, how is this something we take to that step?
I mean, sorry to sound this way, but I find politics kind of godless. I have spent a lot of my life in it, and I'm not knocking it. I thank God for the experience. I've learned a lot. I've done a lot. It has helped me in many ways. But I find there's a kind of godlessness about politics. And I find there's a kind of absence of divinity within the realm of political engagement and existence. There are people, individuals in our history that have really risen above that. The people who come to mind immediately are people like Mahatma Gandhi, in which the politics was an extension of a kind of divine sense of himself in the universe and a divine sense of purpose. You have it in somebody, in my estimation, like Mandela, who had gone through everything that he had gone through. Crippling dehumanization, but yet he was able to have that spirit of charity, of man to man. He was able to forgive apartheid. He was able to call for reconciliation. And the same thing with Gandhi. He was a person above the human realm, if you understand what I mean. And I think in some ways Mandela was too. Mandela didn't talk spirituality, and Gandhi did not talk religion, right? He did not talk religion. He talked spirituality, but he did not talk religion. And he might make reference to religion talking about spirituality. It was very significant, and he was deeply, elements of Hinduism was deeply ingrained in him, but he didn't speak to that issue. And I think that every once in a while you get people in any realm, including in politics, that really rise above the rest, and you make a difference, and you are able to really make a difference in the lives of people. But I must say, I think, if I could, I'm sorry, I know people will be angry with me for this, but I really feel there's an absence of any kind of divine sense or inspiration, or even a sense of humanity, the oneness of the human race. I find those things are absent in current political thinking, behavior, conceptual sense, etc. I'm sorry to say that. I should not have ended on this note. I'm sorry.
Not to end in that note. Let me also, as a sideline, thank you very much for your presence, but the second to last response, I thought it was so profound. The way and actualizing it in words, I think that's a great piece of literature, and we would have caught it there, I'm sure, to something to share and contemplate on. I have two questions, not one, but they're simple questions. One is that to bring us back to the center of the issue here. Dr. Tewarie, what you could say that is one of the things from the Sri Ramcharitmanas either a verse or a story, an incident, a reflection, that as a child of indentureship who came with the Ramcharitmanas, Tulsidas is like our Kul Guru in the Caribbean. What is that one thing, at least you could point out for us, to know what has inspired you or helped you along the way or make you think certain things?
I think I can't remember the exact.
Mike.
Sorry, I can't remember the exact words now, but there's a part in the Ramayan around, so just past the middle of the Ramayan, in which the discussion is on leadership, dharma, and the pursuit of truth with a capital T. And the significance of that, but or the what can I say? The vital necessity of that to have an ethos within the context of the Ramayan of a dharmic life. And I think that has made a difference to me, which is that, you know, the tone of the society, the tone of the community, the tone of the family is really set by the extent to which whoever is the leader at that point, whoever is the head, whoever is the person looked upon, is able to, I wouldn't say live up to expectation, but is able to help people to aspire to greater and greater possibilities and higher levels of, I mean, for want of a better word, dharmic conduct. That is one thing. And the other thing, I think, in the Ramayan, which I think is outstanding, is I think the nature of human love. Okay? Not just a husband for a wife, or a father for a son, or a son for a father, but the nature of human love, and you see it all the time, the exemplar conduct and relationship between two people or among people that really shows you that there's a dimension to the human being in which the highest levels of civility and the highest levels of what can I say, being able to give of oneself and to accept the other person with a sense of charity becomes an important dimension in the business of human living. And I feel that is also significant. And also, in this last reading here, in order to prepare for this, I had never been so struck before about the role of Hanuman in the Ramayan. I was blown away as I was reading it, the role that he played in the Ramayan and the power and significance of the role that he played. He played every role possible, not only the role of being a powerful agent, of being a very, very smart, strategic person, of being able to accomplish things like building the bridge and so on. But you know, he was a master of disguise. He was a master of intelligence, getting information. He was a strategist in war. I find that remarkable for the character of Hanuman, which I never associated with that kind of thing. I mean, I read things, I never pay attention to it. And I thought that was a remark.
No, great, yes. I think the last thing I was going to ask was what you would point out for our nation, and you have done that. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the Q&A session. And I'm so thankful for, I guess, Refugee, for creating this ancestral agenda and giving us the opportunity to have discussions like this in Pitri Paksh and take us beyond the very important rituals that we must do, but to create a space for us to discuss ideas like this. So we come to the end now of tonight's program. I invite the Mandali on the stage to take us through the closing arati, which will really be the mantra of the year 2002. And while they make their way on stage, I will like to just remind you all of the remaining 4 events for the ancestral agenda. Tomorrow night, similar to tonight's program, we are going to have a presentation on themes surrounding Pitri Paksh as seen by the Sri Ram Charitmanas, but the presenter is going to be Sri Mukesh Baburamji, who is a very powerful social commentator. So we look forward to seeing what perspectives he will bring. Yes, and he's here with us tonight, so we look forward to hearing from him tomorrow night. So I invite you all to come to the Mandir and be with us and share in this event. Following that, on Sunday morning, we have our community Tarpan. All information on all events are on social media, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Next week, Friday, we will be having a drama called the Caribbean Panchayat, Who Good With The Work, by the Yuva Vahini, which is the youths, which addresses certain modern issues faced by youths today, as well as focusing on Pitri Paksh. And our final event, which is next week, Sunday, the 25th, not next week, the following week, 25th of September, our All Ancestors Day, neighboring the ancestors, where we join with the Orisha community and the First Peoples to honor all the ancestors of Trinidad and Tobago. So we end tonight's program with the singing of Mantra of the Year 2002, following which we will have the recitation of a poem written by Refugee about our Pitris and their contribution to society. That will be done by Shastri and Kishan Daniel after the singing of Mantra of the Year.
You can follow in the books. It's 2002. One of the most popular chaupais of our Kula Shastra, the Ramcharitmanas.
Bari bhag manusha tanu pava sadhana dham moksha kar dwara. Remember Sri Rama said to Ayodhya, Bari bhag manusha tanu pava, Bari bhag manusha tanu pava, sadhana dham moksha kar dwara. You have a vardhan, born as a human, a mandir for liberation. Bari bhag manusha tanu pava, sadhana dham moksha kar dwara. So let your diya light all day and night. Bari bhag manusha tanu pava, Bari bhag manusha tanu pava. You are divinity, disguised as deity, playing the fool on earth. diya light, light all day and night. Bari bhaag manusha tanu pawa, bari bhaag manusha tanu pawa, bari bhaag manusha tanu pawa, bari bhaag manusha tanu pawa.
बोलिए सियापति रामचंद्र की जय. जय श्री राम. Kishan and Shastri Daniel with the poem.
Namaste. From the time we Aja and Aji crossing Kalapani, they had Tulsi Ramayan for company. They couldn't read, they had no book, but in their memory is where they look. Just start them with any doha, and from that they will sing chaupais just like that. Siya Rama Mai Saba Jagajani, Kara Pranama Jori Jugapani. On Pitri Paksh they sing for me a mantra that remains dear to me. Raghukurariti Sada Chaliai, Prana Jai, Baru Bachanu Najai. How we have to protect Ramayan from generation to generation. And so Sri Rama will protect our nation. And how when Hanuman forget who he was and what he could do, how Jamwant remind him of his ancestral power. Pavana Tanaya Bala Pavana Samana, Buddhi Viveka Vigyana Nidhana. Then Hanuman Baba remember, he is no Kunumunu, and he jump across the sea and land up in Lankawi. So the Ramayan calls on us to remember who we are, and we will find the strength to face challenges that come our way. Sri Rama did sing a special verse when he sat on his throne. Bhare bhag manusha tanu pawa, sura dura rava saba grantha nigawa, sadhana dama moksha karadwara, pai najehi paraloka sanwara. This is our ancestral agenda. This human birth is a great gift. Use it for the good of TNT and have boundless faith in our destiny. Jai Sitaram, Jai Hanuman, Jai Pitri Paksh. May we live well our ancestral agenda. Sarva Pitri ki Jai, Jahaji Pitri ki Jai.
Thank you. So that brings us now to the end of tonight's program. We'd like to thank Dr. Tewarie for sharing so wonderfully with us tonight, and thank all of you for coming out. We wish you a safe journey home, and meals have been prepared, so please you can collect when you are leaving. And we stand now to do closing mantras. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते. ओम शांति शांति शांति. हरि ओम. सियावर रामचंद्र की, गोस्वामी तुलसीदास महाराज की, जहाजी पितृ की, सर्व पितृ की, त्रिनिदाद और टोबैगो देश की. जय श्री राम. See you all tomorrow. Yes. In the